Hello everyone, and welcome along to another episode of Mindful Leadership. And today we're here with my dear friend Natasha, Rocha, and also our special guest Daniel Tolson. So thank you for coming along, and really excited to learn more about Daniel and your stories and your journey and your offerings. And yeah, I'd love to hand over to you, Natasha, to kick us off with a introduction, please.
Yes, hello, welcome everybody. Welcome, Daniel. A little bit of a bio that I'm going to read out here. So we just a quick introduction to Daniel, and then hopefully you can elaborate on this afterwards, Daniel, would be great. So you're a former Australian champion athlete and regarded as Asia's #1 business coach with more than 10,000 case studies on business leaders, co-led a team of 17,500 cabin crew at Emirates Airlines, and has had more than 25,000 leaders apply his ideas to make an impact. So within 90 seconds, using your new breakthrough technologies, Daniel can show you how to become a better leader. Now that sounds so exciting. Tell us about your journey and how you got to the 90 seconds.
Well, I was on a flight from Dubai to Manchester, and I was in economy and I was operating because I used to work with Emirates Airline. And a passenger stopped me and he said, Daniel, he said, your aura fills the cabin. And I said, sir, do you need another drink? And he said, no, I don't drink. And I said, well, are you seeing things? He said, yes, I'm seeing your aura. And I said, well, what's an aura? And he says, it's your energy body. And he started to explain to me what the energy field was. And I was busy serving chicken and beef, and I said, "Look, sir, let me get you some chicken and beef, and I'll come back and have a conversation later on." So we had a conversation in the galley of the 777-300 aircraft with another 400 customers in the front of the aircraft, and it worked out that he was a life coach. And I thought to myself, that sounds phenomenal. I said, life coach, what do you do? And he explained to me what he did, and I hired him. And then over the next couple of months, I started to work with him, and I started to have breakthroughs that I hadn't been able to achieve on my own, things that I've been trying to work on myself. And then one of the things he said to me, he said, Daniel, you can't be your own psychologist. And I thought to myself, what does that mean? And he said, a brain surgeon can't operate on their own brain. And he said, so if you want to get the most out of yourself, somebody's got to help you along the way. And so in 2008, I had started that journey on coaching. And I guess I went down the rabbit hole. The next person I met on the aircraft was on a flight to South Africa. And on that same flight, I had met my wife. She was also a cabin crew as well. And the gentleman that we met on the aircraft, his name was Larry Soffer. And he was a very famous mentalist, and he started to do mentalism on the aircraft. He took the spoons and he started to bend the spoons. He started to bend the forks. And I asked him, I said, how do you do that? And he told me more about that. And I'd asked him what he studied, and he said he'd studied Dianetics. So I went down that path. And so as I'm flying around the world, I'm learning about coaching, but also a lot about spirituality.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. It's amazing how those synchronicities start to happen once you open the doors to that and open up to that. You start meeting the right people at the right places, and things start to follow in, those opportunities show up. So it's amazing when we grab them where life takes us. Absolutely.
I
Yeah, and I
was
love.
put on another flight to San Francisco. And when I got to San Francisco, I had a 48-hour layover. So I Googled esoteric or new age shops, and it took me down to the Bay Area. So I went down to the Bay on the metro, got off, I walked into an esoteric store, and a gentleman said, hello, how are you? Welcome back. And I said, it's the first time I've been here. And he said, you've been here before. And I said, okay. And we started to talk about the shop, and he said, have you looked at tarot cards before? And I said, a tarot? I said, in my house, that would have been a tool of the devil. And he said, no, 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 no. It's good for spirituality, good to help you understand yourself. So he pulled out some cards and he laid one card out on the table and he said, this one reminds me of you. And it was card 18, the moon. And he explained to me the moon card, the personality, the strengths, the fears. And I went, oh my gosh, that's me. And so he quickly did my numbers And based on my birth chart, that was my birth card. And so a lot of synchronicity, and one conversation led to another, and eventually it ended up as a 90-second conversation with some phenomenal technology.
Fabulous. I was going to say, yeah, I love that some of your early journey you're taking us through is connecting with other people, and it's such a powerful journey, right? It's very easy to kind of hide yourself behind, some of those fears that we have, like, oh, that's the devil's work, or that's, that would not be well received in my, my family or in my culture. But you know sometimes these things are kind of there in our awareness, or people are brought into our surroundings. And if you just open up just a little bit, and I love that with each of these interactions you're describing, you always followed up with something. There's always like this next step, because it was a door you were opening. And thank you for sharing that.
The fascinating thing is, once I opened those doors and shared with the right people what I was doing, it was interesting is that their perceptions had changed over time as well. And so my mum, who would have said, that's a tool of the devil, when I revealed to her that I read tarot cards, she was the first one to line up. She said, well, can you give me a reading? I was like, oh my gosh, I've been under this illusion for years. And she's like, oh, I'd be open to that. And it's fascinating because those conversations, especially what I find, the spiritual conversations, a lot of business leaders want to have those conversations. They're not always comfortable doing it in the workplace. But I find a major component for the development of leaders is waking up spiritually and realizing that there's so much more beyond the spreadsheet and the profit and loss statement. We're dealing with humans, and leaders have to realize that humans are complex, and they're not just of a physical body, they're also of an emotional and a spiritual body. And I believe once we start to get the tools to see that in others, it opens up to a new form of leadership that probably was around thousands of years ago, but now I think it's coming back.
Absolutely. I was going to ask you, because sometimes it's like we don't even talk about these things, or we never used to 20 years ago in our personal lives, never mind in our business lives, right? That is even held even tighter. So I was going to ask you, how did you approach the business world with these beautiful tools and helping leaders to really become more effective in their organizations, and perhaps even, creating more of a collaborative teams, and once these things are in place, customer service is better and all sorts of things. So how did you approach connecting in and bringing in these tools, these concepts, these ideas into business?
When I was working with Emirates Airline, we had a team of 17,500 cabin crew. So I had a playground and a big test zone. And before every flight, what the cabin crew and the flight deck do is they meet in a pre-flight briefing. And you sit down at a table with 17 people that you don't know. And the first thing that the leader does is the leader asks for you to introduce yourself and to introduce your special skill. And the thing that I had always seen, which shocked me, was people didn't know their special skill. And the leader would say, well, Jon, please introduce yourself. What languages do you speak? What's your special skill? And they'd say, hi, I'm Daniel. I speak 3 languages. And they'd go silent. And then they would drift off into the unknown. And I was thinking, what are they doing? And the more briefings we did, the more I realized that people didn't know their special skills. So the first thing that I did was I would say, my name is Daniel. I'm from Australia. I speak Australian. I don't speak English very well. And my special skill is reading tarot cards. And the most fascinating thing was all eyes would be upon me immediately. And people would go, did you bring them? Can I get a reading? And I thought, wow, this is fascinating. So I started to tell people that I could read tarot cards. And those conversations turned into coaching and counseling conversations on the aircraft. And they would call it jump seat therapy. Eventually, over time, people used to swap onto my flights and they'd say, my friend Ninny flew with you, and she told me that you're a tarot card reader and I could get a reading. So boyfriends and girlfriends, lovers would come along. Even the captains of the aircraft would make a PA for me to come to the flight deck. I'd say, Daniel Tolson, please come to the flight deck. And then they'd for me, I'd say, make sure you bring your tarot cards. So I would be doing these tarot readings at 40,000 feet. We would do them in the galley at 2 o'clock in the morning. Customers would pop their head in the galley and say, what are you doing? And would quickly hide the cards. And I'd say, are you doing tarot readings? And I'd say, yeah, but don't tell the boss. And so the customers would come in. And that's how I started to build a name for myself. And eventually, as I learned more about coaching, I shifted away from tarot and I started to say, I'm a life coach. And I got the exact same response. Can I talk to you? Can you hypnotize me? Can you NLP me? And then that turned into a business. And I recall before I left Emirates Airline, I'd done more than 500 coaching sessions. One, it was part of my role, but I started to earn money as a side hustle. And then those people would refer me. So I quickly replaced my income. If I was earning $50 an hour, by the time as cabin crew, by the time I left, I was already charging $150 an hour for my side hustle with my coaching.
Beautiful.
But then came the challenge of starting in the business world. But it wasn't too dissimilar. I just had to announce to people what my special skill was. I said, hey, I've got this special skill. It solves these problems in business. Would you be interested in talking? So it was very similar, but I just had to get myself in a different room.
That's beautiful. I love that side of your journey as well, and embracing that passion and purpose. And of course, it's contagious as well, right? When you're doing what you love, it kind of like, expands out to everybody else around you. You mentioned NLP, and just looking up, you work a lot with emotional intelligence. Yeah, so are there a lot of tools that are being put into businesses to kind of like measure when hiring staff, working with teams, things like that? Are you starting to see a growth in implementing a lot of these kind of like tools into businesses?
We say in business today that you've got to trust in science. So what I've recognized since about 2016, there's been a major shift in the way that people hire and also the way that people lead. We're professional coaches, we're professional people helpers, and we're trained to spot things in people that they can't spot in themselves. But unfortunately, in the business world, a leader isn't trained to do what we do. The leader also can't allocate hours on end to understand people's personal and intimate psychology. So since about 2016, what I've seen is a major shift away from paper-based assessments. So when I started to do assessments, I would take a pen and 10 pages of questions and ask people question by question by question, get the answer, tally up all the scores manually. But that was a long, slow process. It quickly changed into digital scanning. So we could quickly understand people's disc styles, people's motivational styles. We could also understand how people made decisions, and we could do that with an online questionnaire. But I think for everybody who's taken an online questionnaire, they ask themselves, how do I want to be perceived in this report? So they answer the questions with certain extremities. Okay, I want to be perceived as a real hustler, a real go-getter. I'm going to answer all those questions so I'm perceived like that so I can get this sales role.
Would be more likely to be successful in, and regardless of what they applied for, because when you have, at some of our moments, we had over 150,000 open jobs, and of course, someone's not going to read them all or search for them all. But we also found that the skills and competencies that exists within the jobs themselves was a really fascinating, like, fundamental challenge for both the candidates and the hiring teams and hiring managers, because it really put to the test, well, what do you think you really want? And it's not just like that. As I hired many people in that company, it wasn't just a 5 seconds when you said they need to do these things, like when you actually look at the day-to-day work, and those in particular, those that went on and were successful through measures of like promotion and their career growth and their happiness and their job satisfaction, that those indicators, we were able to feed back into our systems. And later, just before I left, we moved more into Gen AI and really fascinating explorations and learning a bit more about the magic in some of the models as well. But yeah, I'm really fascinated in your journey. Of course, I'd love to rabbit hole on like the fairness aspect and how do you prove that it's not just Jon Binnies that have third eye chakras open, or whatever. Models are fantastic at learning bias, but I'm also interested like where Natasha was going, which is there's this aspect of like, how do we know when we're helping with tools like this approach, whether it's a manual assessment or whether it's an AI assessment, that it's going to help someone align with the values of a company, the direction of the company, and achieve some sort of happy state where at least they've got a fighting chance of having a good work-life balance.
In the science of job matching, the first thing that you've got to be able to do is you've got to be able to remove the human element. So what we say is let's imagine we're building a robot. And so we try to, instead of trying to build a role to suit Daniel, we try to build it that a robot could do it. And we step back and we say, what are the values that would drive this robot to act? What would motivate the robot to act? What type of skill set would it need to be able to perform this job at a superior level? We would then look at the behaviors. How would this robot approach problems? Should it be really aggressive? How should it approach people? Should it be charismatic or should it be distrusting? How should it interact with the pace and the consistency of the environment? And there's some jobs that the pace is very predictable. It's the same thing day in, day out. But for other jobs, it works at a really dynamic pace. We were doing some job matching today for a business, and the role is doing a different function every 30 to 45 minutes. How does it deal with policy and compliance? Well, somebody like me, I hate rules. I like to break rules. But there's some roles that I'll just never suit because it doesn't suit my personality. So these are the things that we're looking at. What are the behaviors? We're also looking at critical thinking. And there was a tool that was created, I think in the 60s, and it was called a Hartman Value Profile. And it won a Nobel Prize nomination. And what it did was it mapped out the science of decision-making. And a couple of elements that are hidden within that, how do they interact with people? How do they make decisions about people? For me, I'm very suspicious about people, but I have a high level of clarity around that. So with some of the work that I do, I always approach it very distrustful. I'm not going to trust what anybody says, and they've got to fulfill my 10 times convincer before I believe that this is the truth. Where other people will trust people on blind faith, and that also has its benefits. There's no right or wrong. We also look at how people respond to practical and in-the-moment action. Some people are very pragmatic and they can act right now in the moment, where other people are very systemic. And I've heard Jeff Bezos say before is that on his executive teams, some of these people are making decisions on the quarter that they're going to be operating in 10 years from now. So you want a systemic and a conceptual thinker in that role. And so these are all the different things you'd program into the robot. And then based on that science, you want to then run different types of assessments to make sure people fit. But the human element still has to come out in the hiring process. They say that 80% of hiring decisions are made in the first 5 minutes of meeting somebody before they even assess them. And then there's a small portion of businesses, 5% of business leaders, who make the decision to hire somebody in the first 60 seconds. And it's what we call an affinity bias. So all these factors are playing, we're aware of that. So we try to remove that human element out of it. So when I'm doing hiring for our teams, I never want to meet the individual because I can't be clouded by their personality. I'm just looking at the data, and then other people are doing the human element aspects. And so that's how we tend to do it. And the way that we present it to potential candidates is we say, we're not going to make a decision on this hire today. We want to be happy with the people that we hire, and we want you to be happy with the job that you choose. And I heard, Jon, you mentioned it before about happiness. You say that to people, we want you to be happy in the role, and they look at you as if you're from another planet. But that's what we all want. We all want peace of mind. And we've got to be able to go through the process unbiased. We have to have a level of transparency. What makes you happy? Is this the right role for you? Self-select. If it's good for you, go for it. But if it's not good for you, like you mentioned there, Jon, with Amazon, there's 149,990 other jobs available for you to choose. So that's our approach to it. It's heavily based in emotional intelligence, but it requires the leaders to be emotionally intelligent at the start.
And I just want to just go back a moment to the mission of a company. Like when you're doing the assessment of someone for a role, more beyond their immediate role or even the kind of mission statement or goals or principles of their team or their boss, but more like the company as a whole. How do you do any work to try and align, or to express that to people when they're applying so that they know, they can get some sense of like how much they professionally and spiritually align with a company's mission?
Absolutely. When we're doing the job matching, it's one of the first conversations that we have. Why are we in business? What are we doing? Where are we going? And then there's also a level of transparency through the process, is that we will even show candidates the leaders' psychometric assessments. This is your assessment that you've completed. There's a copy for you, 75 pages of insights. And here's 75 pages of the leader that you'll be working with. Now, depending on the company structure, we will show them the CEO or the business owner's values, what drives them, and we'll say, this is what's important to these different people. Does this align with you? So anything that we ask a potential candidate to go through, everybody else has gone through the process at the start. Mm-hmm. So it is vital. Depending on the candidate, some people are looking at that and they're saying that's really important for me, where other roles, they don't consider it. So I guess for us, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but it's always there when it's important for the right people.
Makes sense.
Very cool. From a spiritual perspective, I have a lot of my clients who would shoot me a CV, and I'd go into the Akashic records to see if there's a business contract with the business and the individual, and kind of like whatever information I get, just to have a look at that. So I find that quite fascinating, that you're already connecting to it from a mental emotional perspective, which is brilliant. And just moving on from what you said in looking at asking people, is this a right fit? It's how do we cultivate that honesty in a sense? A lot of the times when we go for an interview, we're wanting the job, we're wanting to fit in. And to have the strength and the courage to say, well, I don't think I can work with a manager like that. That becomes quite important in creating a safe space or environment to be able to cultivate that and say, you know what, thank you for sharing this with me. I don't think it's a right fit. I don't like to be micromanaged, or I do like to be micromanaged, or whatever it is that comes in. And I think it's of utmost importance in finding the right fit and in alignment. I mean, Jon and I have spoken about, jobs where you're working shifts. Like, why would you put evening people and on a morning shift. It just wouldn't, just nobody's happy, kind of a thing. So I think it's very important to start matching up those things, and really, really starting to align. And yeah, so how do we foster that? How do we, cultivate a culture of emotional intelligence within businesses and leaders, and start bringing in these concepts where it's okay to say, no, this is not okay with me.
Claire Graves introduced a model of thinking, and he called it the values levels. And most businesses operate in values level 4, 5, and 6. 6 is more spiritual. 5 is just focused on making money. And 4 is more governmental, where there's a lot of systems and processes. So all Australian businesses operate in values level 4, 5, and 6. However, most people don't understand where their values level thinking is.
Okay.
So when I first started business, I got advice from a marketer that I should combine my spirituality with my business coaching. And I already had a significant following. Within me, my intuition said, Daniel, don't do it. This is not a good idea. Your customers are very values level 5. They don't care how much pain they have to go through to get the result. They will go through the pain, but they're not coming to business to have a spiritual experience. So I knew it intuitively that it wasn't right for my customer profile back in 2013. And so I launched the campaign, and the first thing that happened was I lost all of my followers, because for them, they didn't want that spiritual aspect in the business.
Mm-hmm.
So I really should have followed my intuition more and left that to the side. However, it was a conflict for me, because here in Taiwan, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to have a look at your name, and we're going to do the numerology, and we're going to figure out what your date of birth is, and we're going to go to the master, and we're going to do our birth charts.
Mm-hmm.
And just a couple of years ago, I met a businessman, and I took his name, his date of birth, and I went down to the master, and he said, don't sign a contract with this person. And I didn't sign the contract, and the business didn't go in the direction that he wanted it to. And I would never sign the contract. When I was asked to sign the agreement, I just delay. So with my Taiwan head and heart, totally acceptable here. If I've got to put my Australian head and heart on, asking somebody their date of birth and telling them that you're going to go to the master, there's probably more resistance to it. But that's also a conflict, because when I'm meeting my clients and we're working in the space of emotional intelligence, we end up doing a lot of healing type of work. We do regression techniques. And for people who tell me black and blue, they say, Daniel, I do not believe in past lives. Whenever we do regression therapy, they're always the first people to go, oh my gosh, this problem's coming from a past life. So at the surface, for them, it's hard to accept. Once that relationship and rapport's there, they open up to all of those things. So it's, in my opinion, for what I do, it's just a matter of timing. You got to make sure you check in on your intuition, and then just test the water as you go. And if they say they're not open to it, that's okay. But just remember, they're not open now. Situations change very quickly.
It's true. I'd see patterns like in my clients, and it's similar to my journey, and I'm sure that's not a coincidence, which is that people are also going through spiritual awakenings to lots of different, everyone goes through unique experience at a different rate. And, but some of the themes I see is that people go through it like alone, that they go through some sort of awakening. For me, I meditated for the first time in 2017 and saw the creation of the stars and planets and energy flowing between them. It's like, I'm going to start meditating every day. And it changed my life, coupled with the intentions that I had in that exploration. And I found it quite hard in a very large corporate company to bring all the aspects of myself, because some of these new aspects of me were totally new and some were revolutionary in my personality. Some were counter to the previous version of me. I became much more caring about the people as our customers and their lives, and how we affected them with AI in recruitment, which over time became like this fantastic way of allowing my spirituality and my I guess the desire to deliver for customers, and the tech geek in me. I felt like those started to really align well. And some of the things I started to do was I would do things like take music into work. I started playing music because I was creating songs every day, and I'd play at almost any opportunity and improvise songs for people. And it was showing people that you can follow your passion, in the workplace. And I also did more latterly over the last year, I did meditations in the workplace, like just getting people from around Europe, and some of them were dialing in from the US, to come together and just spend time, with themselves, and really focus on self-care and self-love as a means to driving your productivity, and not the other way around. And the pattern I see in my clients is that many of them are in many different jobs from all different backgrounds, which is fantastic. Many different industries, but the similar patterns tend to be, I'm like Neo in the Matrix. Like I woke up in this job, and the first thing I think many people encounter is that challenge of like fears. Like if I tell people that it's tarot cards I like, or I follow, someone on YouTube that I find really inspiring, or I meditate a lot, or whatever the aspects is that are growing within them about spirituality, it can be a real challenge for them to integrate into business. And I feel like that's one of the missions that Natasha and I came together for, was that we see a world where we don't all have to drop out of our businesses to just then run businesses doing spiritual work alone. That actually we would love to help businesses themselves and leaders change to be more supportive. And not just supportive in that, like, oh, isn't that nice, Jon? You do psychic readings for people and energy healing. It's more like, well, what does that mean? Like your superpowers have changed, and you've evolved new ones. And how does that help your customers in this company? And going through all those same things, that you're discussing, Daniel, about, is this the right fit for you? Like, where would you be best placed? And I also saw that in my role. My role started to change before I left the company, that it was gearing towards my other superpowers. And I love that it's a fantastic way of allowing yourself and like the highest aspects of yourself and the universe to like guide you. If you're growing your superpowers and experiencing these new things, it's a great way forwards. But coming back to my question is, what's your advice for people, for companies, for leaders, when people go through these changes in their lives, these awakenings spiritually, and how can the business best support people?
I think you've got to be able to share that superpower at the start. And when I was with Emirates Airline, I remember we did a briefing, and we were doing a very long flight. So we were departing from Dubai to Beijing, and the captains joined the crew briefing, and they heard that I did NLP in hypnosis. And it was just, people would call it rare that they were there, but there's always a reason why they're there. We got onto the aircraft in Dubai. We were loading the customers, and then the air bridge automatically adjusted, and it dropped about 6 inches. Now, for people who have already got anxiety or feeling anxious about flying, that can give you an instant trauma. The heart and the bowels all drop. And one lady went into a panic attack on the air bridge. And the air bridge is like no man's land. You've left the country and you're almost onto the aircraft, but you're stuck in the middle. And they were having problems getting the lady back into the airport because she said, I'm not moving, because if this air bridge moves again, I'm going to go into another panic attack. And we couldn't get her on the aircraft. Now, what people don't know is that these big aircrafts in these international airports, if your flight is delayed, the fine is $2,000 every minute that aircraft is delayed. So if you're trying to get somebody onto the aircraft and it's taking you 10 minutes, that's a $20,000 cost. So I got a call from the captain. He said, Daniel, you're the expert NLP hypnosis. Can you come and help this lady? I went up past business class, got into first class, walked out onto the air bridge, and I just sat down with the lady on the air bridge. I was in my uniform. We both sat there. I had a talk to her, gave her some ideas of what could be possible for her. And then after a few minutes, we walked onto the aircraft together. I walked her all the way back to economy, and we got that aircraft off the gate within 15 minutes. But as a leader, I had to let everybody know what my special skill was. I had to have no embarrassment or shame about what it was, because if I didn't speak up, nobody else would. So as leaders, we've got to elicit these special skills. And you'd be surprised what skills people have. I used to fly with cabin crew who were lawyers, who were trained doctors, who were surgeons. And you're thinking to yourself, you've got these beautiful certificates and you're here serving chicken and beef. They said, yeah, I just wanted to come and explore the world. So we've got to figure it out. We've also got to make sure, Jon, and you're really bringing the point up, is people don't want to be criticized. People fear judgment. And the job of a leader is to create what psychologists call is an unconditional positive regard. It's that safe space. It's that environment where people can share any thought, any idea without criticism. And the job of the leader is to create that safe space so people can say, this is my special skill. And then the leader should also be asking the individual, how would you like to use that in our business? How would you like to use it? And then find a way together. And I believe if we take that approach, then people are more likely to speak up and share their superpower.
Fabulous.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. Especially because when you go through that awakening phase, you're, like you say, you're so afraid of that criticism. And I know that when I went through it and I decided to move from that corporate into more of kind of like a spiritual support role, I did speak to my husband at the time, and I said to him, we might lose friends because of this. Because they might think I'm woo-woo, I'm out there having a mental breakdown, like, kind of a thing. And he said the most profound thing he actually ever said, knowing him, he said to me, he says, are there really friends worth having if they can't accept this aspect of you, right? And leading a double life or leading or whatever it was. And it's like you say, when I started saying, nope, I've started doing this, it's surprising the amount of people that are like, oh my goodness, like, yes, I want to know about this. I want to do, find out more. How can you support me? And things like that, which is absolutely brilliant. And taking that into a business sense as well is, again, lining up with the people and the jobs that are in alignment and expansive as well, which I think there's a little bit of fear of that change as well that comes into play. So yeah, creating or normalizing, creating a safe space to be able to share those gifts, I think is wonderful.
Natasha, when I was in Dubai, I lived with two other Australian guys. And one of the guys, he had got engaged to his girlfriend and they were planning to get married. And the other gentleman was still single. And I could see for a couple of weeks that he was testing the waters. Have you read this book? And I said, what book is it? He says, it's The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And he gave me a copy. And then he said, have you heard about this book, Conversations with God, with Neil Donald Walsh? And I said, no. And he gave me these books. And he could see that I was very receptive to the books. And I started to read them. And then he said to me once, he said, could I ask you a question? He goes, it might sound a little bit strange. And I said, well, I live with you. I know you're strange already, so bring it on. I said, I'm just as weird as everybody else. And he said, I've been having what feels like out-of-body experiences. And he said, I've been playing with astral projection. Mm-hmm. And he said, I was practicing the other day, and he said, I was floating around in my room and I was kind of stuck in the corner, and eventually I came through into your room. And he said, I saw you in your room doing sit-ups, And he said, can I just kind of explain to how you're doing the sit-up? I said, yeah. He said, you had your feet under the bed. You were on this big black blow-up ball. You had your hands over your chest, and you were doing sit-ups at the end of your bed. And I said, okay, rightio. I said, oh, that's interesting. And I said, what time? And he said, oh, it would have been about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And it was bang on exactly when I was doing sit-ups in my room on my big gym ball. And I said to him, I said, absolutely, it happened. And he said, it was a weird experience. And I said, well, teach me how to do it. So we're in Dubai. It's 2008, 2009. And he's teaching me about out-of-body experiences. And then I'm in a club in the UK practicing out-of-body experiences. And one guy said to me in the club, he said, you showed up into Leicester Square and you're on this board and you came in on this big wave and you sprayed water around everywhere. And he said, any connection? I said, well, I'm a former Australian champion athlete. I ride a board and it sprays water. And through that conversation, he saw a projection of me in Leicester Square. And most people would say, you're bloody out of the world. Yeah, I am. You've got to be out of the world to live in this world.
That's a beautiful story. That's wonderful. Oh, I love diving in with that. Going back to your names, numerology, and all the rest of that. I moved from Canada, closed down my business there, and was going to open it here in the UK, which I did. So I contacted my, she's an evolutionary astrologer, and I said to her, okay, I'm in a year 8 numerologically. I need to start this business. When is the best date to birth this business? I need to know my numbers. I need to know dates. I need to know times, all the rest of this. So she came through and she suggested a few dates as well. So I said to my accountant, okay, I need to be registered on this day, preferably in the morning, you know, around about this time. And I'd given him kind of like a month in advance. And he was like, but I can just do it now. And I said to him, no, you need to register it on this date at this time. And he's like, but I have time. And I was like, okay, I was like, you know, I'm into this metaphysical space. I'm into the spiritual space. I'm birthing my business and I need to work with these energies because this is what I want to do. And then he was like, okay, it was more like the client's always right. I'll do it on that day. So he put in that thing, but it was that confusion of like, you've got the date, like, let's just do it now. You're ready for it. And I'm like, nope, I need to birth it on this date. You know, so it is very, very interesting because the vibrational frequency of names and times and dates absolutely adds into to all of that. So yeah, it reminded me of that story and kind of like that acceptance of that
so
too.
Cool.
Yeah.
I just realized today I was passing my old home that the number of the house was 22, and I remember when I bought the house, looking up the number, and it's like, oh, I think that's to do with some sort of change. I wonder what change will happen. And then just a few months later, I went through a spiritual awakening, and then I left the home in 2022 on the 2nd of September, and I was like, wow. And I think that's like, isn't that like a couple of years ago? It's coming up for that, and it's like, this is. Wow, those numbers like were really real. Like they did definitely give me patterns. And sometimes, like especially when it's your house number and it's staring at you every day, multiple times every day, I'd look at the 22 in and out of the house. Yeah, I now you're making me think, Natasha, like, oh, I just picked the day after my contract ended with my last company to register my new company. But I did talk to my spirit guides about the name. And I spent a lot of time chatting about that, and that was really, really helpful. And I just asked, "What's my superpower?" And they said, "It's your heart." So it's like, oh, heart centered. That's what I want my business to be.
In Taiwan, when we choose a name for our children, we always consult the master, and they'll look at my name, they'll look at my wife's name, they'll look at possible time and date of birth, as Natasha was mentioning. And then they're going to craft the characters. How many strokes does the first name have? Okay. How many strokes for the second? How many strokes for the third? And then as they do the birth chart, they also make significant predictions about the health and the dangers and the opportunities for the child. And so these things at the start of the child's life we always keep in our awareness. We have a very healthy respect with it. Okay, we don't want to be overprotective, but we also want to have healthy advice from a guide, whether it be a spirit guide or a master. And it always seems for me that there's an element of truth in it if we're willing to accept it. And I remember I was in real estate, and it was probably around about 2000, and I was talking to a friend of mine, and I all of a sudden felt this extreme pain in my arm, like it was like being snapped off. And I was like, oh, she said, what's wrong? I said, I don't know. I said, but I feel like my arm's just been broken in half. And then my other hand started to ache here. And I said, I've got to go. I'm out of here. Now, I shouldn't have been away from work. I should have been at work. But I went back to work, and I spoke to my uncle, and I said, I had the weirdest experience today. I said, I felt like my arm just got snapped in half here. And then I felt like this thumb got pulled all the way back here. And I was talking to a friend, and I said, the pain was insane. And he said, oh, what time did it happen? And I said, I was probably like maybe 2:00, 2:30, somewhere around there. And he said, okay, radio. And then he said, do you know what happened at that time? And I said, what do you mean happened? He said, your cousins were involved in a car accident. Oh, wow. And he said, your cousin snapped her left arm in half here. Wow. And when the car flipped over, your cousin's hand kind of went through the steering wheel and ripped his thumb back here. Now, I had that feeling. I didn't know how to connect it. But by having that conversation with somebody who had a little bit more information, we were able to draw the conclusion that I was feeling that somatic whilst they were going through that experience. And when we reflect on our life, there's so many things that are a pattern. Names, numbers, situations. I met a girl when it was 2005, and she was cabin crew for Emirates Airline. Fell in love with her, traveled the world with her, and I ended up in Dubai. And I went and stayed in her apartment, which was called Yellow Building. The relationship didn't go in the right direction. We went in different directions, and I ended up starting to work with the company. In 2009, I was on a flight from Dubai to Johannesburg, and there was a beautiful Taiwanese young woman on the flight, and I said, hello, how are you? And got talking to her, and I ended up dating her, getting engaged, and she lived in the exact same apartment building, working for the exact same company as my former girlfriend. Mm. And so what I say to people is I have a laugh and say, I was just in the wrong apartment. I was there a couple of years early and in the wrong apartment. And people say that's coincidence. No, it's not. There's a master plan in place. And I was just too early to see it. But when you connect the dots, okay, that was meant to happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Don't believe in accidents either. Everything's in alignment. Everything's happening for a reason. Yeah, no, it's beautiful.
My wife, Natasha, we started to date. We met on a flight to Johannesburg. And so we started to date in 2009, and she was really dissatisfied with her job. She was having heart problems. She was taking sleeping pills, and it was the wrong job for her. And she knew it. And she said, you know what? I need to quit this job. And I said, well, quit. She says, but I don't know what I'm going to do next. And I said, well, just quit, get your health, and then decide. She said, no. And I said, well, what do you want to do? She said, I want to get a job where I get paid to do nothing. And I said, well, I don't think many of those exist. There's only one job that I know that you get paid to do nothing. And she said, oh, I'll just keep working. She kept working, kept getting sicker, losing her health. And one morning at 4 a.m., I got a telephone call from my duty controller. And I used to be in peer support and critical incident stress management. So if there was an accident on an aircraft, they would call me and my team, and would go out and do counselling. The telephone rang. Duty controller said, Daniel, this is the duty controller. This is not a duty call. So 4 o'clock in the morning, what is it? He said, it's your fiance. She's had an accident on an aircraft. So I went down to the Landside Hospital. There she is unconscious in a stretcher, and she's bandaged up from ankle to hip. And she took a fall on the aircraft at the time of landing, and it shattered her kneecap in 5 places. The surgeon said, we need to remove the kneecap immediately. And I said, could you just wait a little bit? You know, could you just maybe wait overnight and let her have a say in this? He said, okay, I guess we could do that. And so she came home. We went back to the hospital. They fixed the knee to the best of their ability. And after the surgery, the surgeon said, well, good news is you're going to recover. Bad news is you're going to need 2.5 years to recover. And the company then said, don't worry about it. We will pay you. And I looked to my wife and I said, you got exactly what you wanted. She said, what? I said, you got a job where you got paid to do nothing. And she said, that's not what I wanted. I said, well, that's what you asked for.
That's what God's
for. And she got it. And, you know, we fought about that for years. And after about 3 years of fighting and arguing about that, she said, you know what? You're right. Maybe it wasn't what I wanted, but it was what I asked for. I should have stipulated the terms. And during that healing process, she couldn't get past that she was the victim of this. She thought she was a victim. She positioned herself as a victim, and her knee wouldn't heal correctly. The moment that she accepted responsibility and said, I co-created this, I was a part of this, I wanted a job, I wanted to get paid to do nothing. Once she came to that realization and accepted it, all the heat disappeared from the knee and the knee started to heal. Even the scar started to disappear. Once she came to acceptance that she co-created this thing.
That is fabulous. Yeah, what my experience of it, I didn't damage my knee, etc. But one thing I did ask for was when earlier this year, just in January, I resigned from my corporate job. I'd been there for 8 years, and I said, that's it, I'm leaving. But I said, I'm going to leave by the end of this year. In fact, my date is, I gave a date in December. And they're like, why would you give us 12 months notice? And I said, well, my notice period is 3 months. I'm going to get some qualifications and I'm going to save up and I'm going to leave by then. This is to let you know, and also give you clear sight of like where it is I'm going. And on my journey, I'd love to, my lunch breaks, whatever, whenever I get an opportunity to do things like mindfulness meditation or readings for people. And I remember just about 3 or 4 weeks later, I was chatting with my manager and they're saying, oh, you know, there's more changes coming. We're doing more reorganization. And I was like, I said, maybe you could make me redundant. And they're like, well, I don't know how to do that. And I said, well, maybe you could ask HR. I said, you just log a ticket with them and just ask. And so that's exactly what happened. 3 weeks later, I was out in the US and I got a call with my manager in HR, and they were very sad to tell me that my position was redundant and that I'd be leaving the company. And I was just I felt so blessed. And if I'd never asked for that, and it was the best redundancy. I have had redundancies that I didn't want, or so I thought in previous jobs in my career. But in this moment, it felt like such a blessing to be able to go on and start my business without having to immediately panic about how would I pay the mortgage in the first couple of months. So yeah, I started to realize that the universe is conspiring to support you, not to destroy you. And you just with a clear intention and a clear ask, you can really change your life. Yeah, thank you for sharing. And I hope your wife's knee is it all healed up and better now?
It was probably the best thing that happened to her, because she now says she can turn her shit into sugar. And when she shares that story, people go, oh my gosh, like that's so inspiring. She doesn't think it's inspiring. She's like, it just happened to me. Mm-hmm. And she had to reinvent herself. Mm-hmm. What do her clients want? They all want reinvention, and they want to do it without the pain. So I believe that even in our field, we can definitely profit from our pain. And I've been saying that to my clients for a long time. You paid a big price for your pain. Now you got to get a return on the investment. I remember I went through 2 major knee reconstructions, and a lot of what I went through was, yes, physically painful, but I also learned a lot about resilience. What do I specialize in? Emotional intelligence. What's a major component? Resilience. Hey, here's a story. This is what didn't work for me. This is what works for me now and what could work for you. So I'm always sharing lessons based on those things. And for coaches and healers, my belief is that a lot of us get into this field because we first experienced the field because we had a pain that we wanted to break through or a goal that we wanted to achieve. And we've drunk from the cup and we say, hey, it's good. Have some of this. There's a better way. And for me, I remember when I had my first knee injury, a couple of years before, my brother had torn his ACL, and he got this beautiful CTI knee brace, and he looked like RoboCop. And he would be out there riding, and I'd go, gee, that knee brace looks really cool. I'd love to have one of those. 6 months later, there I snapped my PCL back on the water. 9 months later, what do I have? I got the same knee brace. And then I did it again, and I got to wear 2. We do co-create in so much stuff. Absolutely. And part of the healing that I do is that once we realize that we've co-created it, that we had a say in what happened and we can accept that, we can move on really fast. And then the body starts to heal.
I absolutely agree. I very much similar journey to your wife. I didn't get quite as injured as she did, but I broke my leg in 5 places playing bottom of the league, mom and pops, non-competitive softball. When I realized I was competitive, it was that aspect of taking that time, that 6 months to take care, and it gave you that 6 months to really start to think about who am I, why am I here, what do I want to do, and absolutely helping people in moving forward. And it's amazing how we all have that physical, well, a lot of the times, Jon, you were quite open to kind of like being like, no, I'm not going to physically, the body isn't going to, like the body starts to tell us, hey, this is too much, hey, you're unhappy, hey, and we're so resilient that we continue to push through that. We can, next week, next month, it will get better. Next position, new job, same position. And the body eventually goes, I'm done, you're done, we're going to sit down. And it's because we're not listening to our soul, because we're not, and we co-create that. And I think from that experience, I started to learn in how does this work for me? What is the bigger picture? What am I supposed to be here to learn? And I think that's what's been happening in looking at, okay, a lot of my clients can tend to get to me and they're like, I can't believe this is happening. This is the worst time possible. And it's just like, no, how is this working for you? Like, let's have a look at this, right? I had a client of mine, we're just about to get a mortgage, everything's going through and it fell through. And she's like, well, what am I going to do? I'm like, just trust, you're co-creating this. She ended up getting another lending company, got a better rate, and it delayed things. I was like, see, it's all working for us. Just look at it. What are the lessons? How is it working for us? Like, let's really look at things from a different perspective. And I found that very interesting. But I'm very similar. I resonate with your wife quite a bit in in what she experienced.
The power of the word is creative. And then the emotion accelerates that process. And I was working with a businessman, and the language that he used, he would say, this work is neck-breaking work. And he'd physically put his hand up here and he'd stretch his neck. And he'd repeat that over and over and again. He'd go to work. He hated the people that he worked with. It was back-breaking work. It was neck-breaking work. He was sick. He was tired. And this job was going to break his neck. And he kept doing that. And he did it for more than 6 months. And then one day he was driving home in his truck and he had a car accident. He didn't have his seatbelt on. He went halfway out the front window. He broke his neck and he broke his back. And he never had to go back to that job ever again.
Wow.
And I said to him, I said, why don't you just use that process to help you instead of hurt you? And he said, that's why I'm speaking to you. And so many of us do it. We speak something and at the start there's no emotion, but that emotional intensity increases and it starts to accelerate. but we always get what we ask for, and we're just got to be careful of that speech. I like to say to my clients, say it how you want it. And this is a problem with our culture. The culture in the UK, how's the weather? Not bad, could be worse. How are the kids? Well, they're not in jail. How's business? Well, I ain't bankrupt. You told me all the things that you don't want. You told me all the things that aren't happening. But the unconscious mind doesn't process negatives. So I think everybody's had the experience. They say, oh, I don't want to get caught in traffic. How is it possible that you get every single red light in Scotland today? They say, I don't want to have a blow up with the missus. And they go home and they just nonstop fight. So the unconscious mind, it doesn't process that negative. So if you say, I don't want to have a fight with the missus, it just hears, I want to have a fight with the missus. Okay, if that's what you want, we'll give it to you. And we've got to gain that awareness. And that's the first pillar of emotional intelligence is self-awareness.
Yeah.
If we can't name it, we can't tame it.
I love that our words do have magic. Like they definitely create our reality. Just yesterday I was visiting my father, who's in the hospital for a few days, and I have a camper van. It's about 6 meters long, and it is if I'm watching my words here, you always need to ask. I call it parking ferry. So, and I don't always remember, and I didn't remember yesterday when I went to this very, very busy hospital car park. And when I turned up at the car park, I just said to my daughter, just how are we going to fit this camper van? These spaces are tiny and all the cars are parked really strangely. And she's like, what about your parking ferry? And it's like, okay, so I stopped the van for a moment and said, okay, parking ferry. I would like a parking space that's quite near to the entrance, that's easy to get in and out of, and it doesn't annoy other people that I've got a larger vehicle than most. And then in that moment, literally, this woman gets in her car and pulls out, and it's quite a large car. She comes out of the parking space, and I was looking at it and I was thinking, I just don't know how I'm going to get in it. And my daughter said, you can reverse in that one. And I was like, yes, I can reverse into that space. And I've got a little reversing camera, and little did I know that, of course, the back of the vehicle is a complete box. So it's way easier to reverse into stuff. And we got in, and it just worked. And it helps me reflect on all those moments that I complain about things in my life, or I've been sad at work with someone and someone says, leadership are terrible, or my money's terrible. And they're telling you all the things, like they're reinforcing with such energy every single day, all the negative things that they do not like. And it did take me a while on my journey of coaching other people to realize that there's actually an infinite universe, an infinity of all the things you could decide you do not want. And I'm not even sure that you'd ever reach that infinity, right? You'd ever get to the stage where you said, this is all the things I don't want. And actually, it's really, really simple. You just need to do the opposite. You just need to say what you do want and say it every day. And reaffirm to yourself how you're getting there. Like, I'm excited because today I'm getting more time to follow my dream, and this is the thing I'm doing. And look at all these things are popping up and these challenges, and I just need to take a moment to see what lessons they're teaching me, because they're trying to help me get to this this goal, my vision. And yeah, I really resonate with the power of words. And I love, Daniel, you saying, like, it's the emotion that fuels them. It's like the amplification of a word.
So it's like an affirmation. A lot of people do affirmations and they just sub-vocalize it. They're just talking inside of their head. What they don't realize is if you say the emotion out loud, it has twice the impact. You say, I like myself, and it goes out of your mouth and it comes back into the ears, and your brain and your body's heard it twice. But if you don't put any emotion into it, like if I say, I like myself, it feels so incongruent. So you've got to get in the emotional state, because the emotion is the accelerator pedal. So you say, I like myself, I like myself, I like myself, I like myself. And then you start to smile. And when your lips turn up here and you start to twinkle in the eye, the brain says, okay, release the serotonin, release all the happy hormones in the body. So it doesn't become just words and emotions. It becomes chemical inside the body. All those neurotransmitters start to fire off and the whole body feels good. And the more you do that, the more you influence that emotional state. But there's also that spiritual component. You can call them a spiritual guide. You can call it God, whoever it's going to be. You can call it your parking fairies, but it signals all those things. Hey, come out and help. This is the new journey. This is how I want to feel. Help me do it more often. And that's the power of the word. What do they say? Thought, word, and deed. We have approximately 60,000 thoughts per day, according to the Cleveland Brain Institute. I didn't count them. 95% are negative. And the reason why our thoughts are negative is because it's a survival mechanism. What do we say to our kids? Don't run out on the street. Why do we say that? We don't want them to die. What do we say? We're in the kitchen. Don't touch the knife. You'll cut yourself. Don't touch the stove. You'll burn yourself. It's just that mechanism to survive. But that natural mechanism to survive doesn't help you thrive physically, spiritually, or emotionally. We have to control it. The other thing is 80% of our thoughts are on repeat, and we just keep thinking the same stuff over and over and again. The beauty about the stuff is you can control 100% of what's conscious, and you can say, I like myself, and that substitutes, and it blocks out all the other garbage. So you got to figure out what you want to say, and then just got to keep repeating it until the unconscious part of you believes it and then acts on it automatically. But we've got to have some help along the way. Somebody's got to point it out to us.
Just before I left my corporate job, I'd said to myself negatively for 2 years that I would fail to start a business. And then I knew that had to change. Like I just knew that was never there was never gonna be a Jon that would survive that future. And so just before I left, I just changed my narrative, and I just said, you know what? I'm building a business. I'm starting a business. I love my business. And now whenever I'm like, oh, I wonder what my sales are like this month. It's like, I'm building a business. It's so exciting. And that it's so funny because it doesn't even take that many attempts, right? To not just stop the negative talk, but then to realize that it's actually it's creating the reality around you. And and everyone feels it too, right? They're like, they're not just feeling sorry for you all the time. They're actually they're admiring your success, and you're becoming so much more. And I love what you're saying, Daniel. Like you're so much more attractive to yourself. Like you're saying, like I love myself, and it's such a huge thing for us in our work and the rest of our lives.
That emotion of love, that has a frequency of 500 hertz. The emotion of fear has a frequency of 100 hertz. And as we start to drop down in that emotional frequency, the body starts to get disease and illness. Yeah. And if we take those positive thoughts and combine them with those positive emotions and resonate at a higher frequency, we can heal our own bodies. But it also attracts a very different person into your life. And when I grew up, my mum would always say, Daniel, misery loves company. So in our family, it was never complain. Just don't complain, because you don't want to attract those people into your world. But as you start to resonate at that higher frequency, people are attracted to you. And what I learned during COVID was that emotions are contagious. Yeah. And I did a lot of work online, training thousands of people every month. And I was spiritually worn out. And what I didn't realize was that I was absorbing all of their low-level frequency, and the internet was actually magnifying it. And I contacted one of my mates and I said, I've never been so drained before. He says, what's happening is that emotion in the group is getting magnified and amplified through the internet. He said, you've got 500 people on Zoom at a time, and they're projecting energy onto you, and you're receiving it. And I got sick during COVID because I had absorbed so much emotion. And I looked deeper into the field, and there's a phenomenon called emotional absorption. You actually pick up emotions. And the problem, and we talked about NLP and hypnosis before, the problem with these modalities is that when we learn NLP and hypnosis, we also learn how to match and mirror people. We learn how to build rapport, not at a conscious level, but at an unconscious level. So as we match and mirror their physiology, as we match and mirror their word and their tone and their emotional state, our neurotransmitters are firing off saying, Daniel, these expressions are related to fear. Now my body's flooded with fear. And so this type of absorption is a phenomenon. And some of us who are more highly sensitive people who have started to awaken up towards spirituality, we call them highly sensitive people. And we absorb emotion very easily. And it can be very fatiguing. So we've got to be mindful of that energy that we're putting out there, making sure it's a higher frequency, because all of those high frequencies, they neutralize the lower frequencies. You know, emotions like shame are all the way down there to about 30 hertz. Illness and disease activates in the body at around about 52 megahertz. But if we have that higher frequency, you look at optimistic people who operate at a higher frequency, very rarely sick, excellent health.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I think we could talk to you all day, Daniel. Tell us, where can we find you? How, if anybody wanted to look you up or do some coaching with you, how do people find you?
Go to my website, danieltolson.com. There's a ton of resources there. And if you want to experience our technology, up in the right-hand side, it says Mind Report Free. It'll take you 90 seconds and it will reveal to you your stress type, your personality, and we'll also have a look at the energy in the 7 energy centers of your body. And it will give you breakthroughs that you just can't achieve on your own.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Shall we jump into meditation?
I'm ready.
Yeah,
I know we're running a little bit over time, so I was like, oh, I'd love to talk to you all day. Shall I do a quick meditation, Jon, or do you want to?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. So let's close our eyes. Let's take a couple of deep breaths. Breathing in through our nose and out through our mouths. And as we exhale, let's release any tension, stress, or negativity that we're holding on to within our bodies. Let's open up the chakras on the soles of our feet, connecting into the energy of Mother Earth, allowing this energy to move up through into our bodies, bringing in some grounding, some nurturing, some connection. And let's imagine that we've got a golden light coming in from above, penetrating the top of our heads, moving down our spine, clearing out our energy centers, our chakras, our meridians, releasing any lower vibrational frequencies when it no longer serves us. Allow this energy to continue to expand throughout our body, releasing, removing, dissolving any disharmony, any dis-ease, and any discomfort we're feeling in our physical form. Allowing it to move beyond our skin into our auric field, allowing it to clear any static distortion and interference, and bringing in harmony within all our bodies, aligning all of our bodies with our highest selves and our I am present. Feeling completely grounded, centered, and connected, let's drop into our heart space. And from a place of unconditional love, a place of curiosity, let's ask our heart, What is my gift? What is my superpower? And how can I use these gifts to be of service? Breathe that in, accept this, expand and get curious about how you could expand on these gifts and how you could share them with the world. And let's ask the heart one more question. What is one thing I can do today to express this gift or the superpower? And let's thank the heart for giving us the knowledge and wisdom. And let's breathe that in once more. Coming back to the here and now. Journal the knowledge, the wisdom that you've experienced. And let's take action to bring that gift, that superpower into the world. And when you are ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. That
Thank
was
you.
really beautiful.
Welcome. Thank you so much, Daniel, for joining us and sharing your knowledge and wisdom with everyone. Really appreciate you and what you do in this world too.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing everyone again in our next podcast. Thank you and take care, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.